Alexander the Great Volkanovski headlining UFC 284 Perth, Australia against Charles do Bronx Oliveira inside of the lightweight division. Now, this is something I have been contemplating and going back and forth on so many times. As I've been making this video so many times saying maybe Alexander versus Oliveira at UFC 284, maybe Charles Oliveira versus Benio Dariush UFC 283, where Volkanovski fights the winner of Josh Emmett and Yair Rodriguez at UFC 282. I've been thinking of a lot of different things that could happen in the UFC's featherweight and lightweight division, but I'm going to be dead honest with you, thinking about it so much has actually led me to the conclusion that UFC 284 is going to be Alexander Volkanovski versus Charles Oliveira. That is the title of today's video, and I, for once, agree with that title of Volkanovski versus Charles Oliveira as the main event of a Perth pay-per-view, or the co-main event of that pay-per-view. I don't know if it's going to be main event or co-main event. It really kind of comes down to what the UFC is going to think. I did make a video yesterday or the day before of Robert Whittaker, Alex Pereira, or Robert Whittaker, Israel Adesanya 3 in the UFC's middleweight division, headlining UFC 284 Perth, Australia. I changed my mind. I think that'll be the co-main event behind Alexander Volkanovski and Charles Oliveira. The reason I do believe Oliveira is going to be going out there and fighting against Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 284 Perth is because as of right now, for Josh Emmett, taking on Yair Rodriguez, I don't think Yair is immediately going to get the title shot against Alexander Volkanovski. I mean, I'm going to look at the UFC rankings right now. Yair's at number 2. Josh Emmett is going to be at number 4 in the UFC's lightweight division. Neither guy deserves a title fight right now. Yair just went out there and beat Brian Ortega by injury. Lost to Max Holloway before that. That is one fight in a row. That's one fight in a row. Yair does not deserve a title fight after beating number 3 Brian Ortega. And Josh Emmett getting a split decision robbery over Calvin Kattar also does not deserve you of a title fight. So if they're going to make a matchup between Emmett and Yair versus Volkanovski at UFC 284, well, they're going to have to match them up fairly quickly between Yair and Josh Emmett. And I'm looking at a lot of these UFC fight nights that are coming up. We got, UFC 281? No, they're not going to schedule it for literally 1 month from now. There's no way. They're just randomly going to add Josh Emmett, Yair Rodriguez to the card. Not going to be Louis Spivak, not going to be Thompson versus Holland. UFC 282 is a possibility to have Josh Emmett and Yair Rodriguez as a potential co-main event behind Yuri Prochazka and Glover Teixeira, or behind maybe a Stipe Miocic taking on the man, the myth, the legend in, you already know the name, John Jones. That could be the co-main event, but even if they make Yair Rodriguez taking on Josh Emmett as the co-main of UFC 282, look at the amount of time that they're going to have to come back and fight one of the greatest fighters of all time in Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 284. UFC 282 is on December 10th. 2 months after that will be February 11th in Australia. I do not believe the winner of Josh Emmett and Yair Rodriguez in the only viable fight card, which is going to be UFC 282, for them to fight for the interim title for the featherweight belts. That's the only viable card for them to fight on, and that only gives them 2 months. 2 months to figure out who's going to be fighting at UFC 284 in that main event against Alexander Volkanovski. That was my original thought. I was like, for sure, they're just going to make Josh Emmett versus Yair Rodriguez. Winner is going to fight Volkanovski at UFC 284. But they've waited way too much time. They've waited way too much time. If they maybe just went out there and added UFC 278 to have one of those two guys, to have Josh Emmett versus Yair Rodriguez as the co-main event of UFC 278, Usman versus Edwards, maybe if that was an interim title fight at UFC 278, For sure, I can definitely see them putting on a fight between Josh Emmett or a fight between Yair taking on Alexander Volkanovski. They put him at UFC 279, at UFC 280 for sure. That's enough time for them to come back and fight Volkanovski at UFC 284. But now, the only viable card is 282, only giving them 2 months to prepare for a matchup with Alexander Volkanovski, whereas Oliveira is going to be fighting at UFC 280 on the main event of the pay-per-view, giving him how much time? How much time is that going to give Oliveira? October 22nd of 2022 gives him about, 2 months, 3 months to UFC 283. That's why I don't actually think he's going to fight at UFC 283 in the main event. I do believe they'll put Yuri Prochazka taking on Glover Teixeira as the main event of UFC 283. Not to mention, I don't think he's going to be coming back that fast after what I think will be a war with Islam Makhachev. So give Charles Oliveira a good timeline of 4 months to prepare for an Alexander Volkanovski fight. Give Alexander Volkanovski also 4 months to prepare once Charles Oliveira is done fighting against Islam Makhachev. Makes a lot of sense to me for the main event of UFC 284, Perth, Western Australia. If you're looking at them UFC rankings inside of the UFC right now, well, Volkanovski is number 1, Charles Oliveira is number 3, Israel Adesanya is at number 2, so have the number 1 and number 3 pound-for-pound fighters in the world in the main event. Double champ status on the line, as well as Israel Adesanya and the number 15 pound-for-pound fighter Robert Whittaker inside of the co-main event, or Robert Whittaker, Alex Pereira in that co-main event. Maybe tied to Ivasa on the card as well, but you got to think about it logically. I was kind of thinking about it from just a standpoint of who realistically is going to go out there and challenge Volkanovski for the featherweight belt. I thought maybe the UFC would play it safe, put an interim title on Emmett versus Yair, just have them fight at UFC 284, have Volkanovski get an easy finish inside of UFC 284, but you think about when they could possibly fight, it only gives them 2 months to prepare for Alexander Volkanovski. That's not enough time. Only makes sense that the main event of UFC 284 is going to be Alexander Volkanovski. And I can't wait to see if the UFC legitimately makes this fight. It'll be absolutely amazing if they do. UFC 284 is going to be stacked. I mean, we'll probably have the top 3 pound-for-pound fighters in the world on the same exact card. A top 5 heavyweight on there as well. Some top 15 guys. Jake Matthews will probably be on there. We'll have Jack Della Maddalena, Jimmy Crute. We'll have some really good fighters on that card. Casey O'Neill as well. It'll be a very solid card, but I think Volkanovski going out there taking on the man, the myth, the legend, Oliveira at UFC 280 makes all the sense in the world. Put your thoughts down below. Is that the fight to make? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.